Hey, yeah, it's Katona Rose, and this is another Just the Facts Ma'am Cyberpunk edition. So there seems to be three basic camps of people when it comes to Cyberpunk. There's the group that waited for it for so long, played it from the very beginning, and was super disappointed with all the bugs and how it was released. And they've basically decided that that's it. They're done. They're done with trying, and they've never gone back to the game. There's the second group, which is very similar to the first group in that they tried the game, it didn't work out, but once the fixes started coming in, they went through and played it and ended up really loving the game. And then there's people like me who sort of missed all of the bad stuff. And by the time I played, the game was pretty much finished. And so I find it really interesting now that the DLC is coming out, what's going to happen and where it's going to go from here. Everything I'm reading has a lot to do with, the final redemption for CD Projekt Red. And I get it. I get where that's coming from, and I get why it's all wrapped up in the conversation. But I really wonder if what we should be talking about and what we should be thinking about has more to do with what we put up with as gamers. I really think that so many of us are willing to forgive a lot. We're willing to let things go. But I don't think any of us really want to see games unfinished, released games that we've been waiting for unfinished. We also don't want to see huge burnouts from studios or bad behavior from studios. I think that in general, we are hoping for people to enjoy what they're doing and to enjoy making these games so that by the time they get to us, we're part of that enjoyment and we're not sort of two separate camps. There's been a lot of stuff released lately that has not been finished, that has not been ready, that has been a huge disappointment. Gollum, obviously, top of the list. Redfall is in there as well. And then there's all this sort of pressure behind Starfield to see whether or not it's going to be like everyone else and release unfinished with a ton of patches coming in the first month, or if it's actually going to be a released finished game. When I first started watching people play Cyberpunk back when it was first released, I remember thinking there was a lot to it that I liked. I liked the RPG aspect of it. I liked the world, the cyberpunk genre in general is interesting to me. I like cyberpunk. I like steampunk. I like biopunk. It's all, stuff that I just get a kick out of and I find super interesting. It's always sort of fun to think about what the world is going to look like in the future, right? And so we're talking about 50 years from now, what is the world going to look like and what is the world going to feel like? And that's a fun, just mental exercise in general. My biggest problem, I think, was that most of the gamers I watch played a very, hot and heavy, guns blazing, aggressive style. And that's just not me. I'm very much a stealth player. And I like sort of sneaking around. I like almost being like private detective-y. It just makes me excited and happy. I really think about games a lot when there's sort of a detective-y element to it, rather than just go in and shoot everybody and get whatever it is you need and leave. So that's part of the reason I think why it took me so long to try Cyberpunk in the first place. The second reason is just simply, it sort of fell off my radar. And the only reason why I really came back on is because I happened to see a sale. And I grabbed it for my Xbox for like $30. And I felt like for $30, even if it is buggy, it should be a long enough game that I should get something out of it. What I wasn't expecting was to be so completely enamored and engulfed in the story and the character and everything that was happening around her. I played V as a female. I think that Jeremy Lee's voice is so perfect, so kind of throaty and evocative and emotional.
Just don't fall in love with me.
And it just worked for me. I liked the way my V looked. I liked the way she sounded. I liked the way she moved through the world. I think there's a lot of talent attached to Cyberpunk, both in, mega superstars and also just like the general voice actors. I think everybody kind of came in and hit it out of the park. I do have issues with it. I think that for somebody who is not a completionist, but who does like to sort of get achievements and finish things out, having the relationship between Johnny and V sort of not be linear if you do things out of order. For instance, I played through the main game and then I went back and I did a lot of like the side hustles and the police jobs. And at that point, Johnny and V had a great relationship, but some of the side hustles when I went back to them, he was kind of being an asshole again. And so, it was clear that I should have been playing those earlier on. That pulls you out a little bit. I really wish that certain relationships were able to be dealt with differently. I also wish that all of the romanceable characters had the opportunity for equal screen time. I think some of them got a lot more attention than others. I don't particularly mind that there are preferences amongst those characters for male versus female, voice and male versus female body. That doesn't bother me really at all, but it does bother me that playing with Judy, you get a lot more time with her versus playing with River when you kind of get two quests, one of which is, pretty long and intense. But that's sort of it. And I wish that once you had the relationship set up, that there was more to do with those people after the fact. Especially when you're thinking about a character possibly dying, making the most out of that last, months of life or whatever. It just seemed sort of to not hit the mark. I know a lot of people have talked about the improvements that are coming with the game, whether or not you get the DLC. The idea of making the warrant system and the cops more appropriate reactive, I didn't really run into that much. I don't think I ever got issued a warrant. Again, I'm much more sneaky than I am someone who's going to go out with my guns out. But I do understand that some people felt like the cops were not leveled properly for what you were doing. I know that some of the NPCs were sort of bullet sponges. Those, I think, are going to be edited a bit as well. The thing that's most interesting to me about the base game update is the changing of the skill trees. This was kind of the first game I ever played where I wasn't sort of fully maxed out in multiple skills by the time I finished the game. Even Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is this massive like spider web of skills, I was able to get all of them before I had finished the game. So it kind of, I don't know, it's just interesting to me, this idea of sort of restructuring it and putting it into different places. I'm really, really interested to see what CD Projekt Red does for existing games. So like, for instance, my save, what's going to happen with that? Do I get to repick where my skill points are going, or are they going to be reassigned based on whatever? I also am curious to see how it works for a new startup. One of the things that I keep going back and forth on is whether I want to play the DLC with my existing V or whether I want to start the game over. Cyberpunk 2077 was the first game I ever really played where before I had finished the game, I was already thinking about what I would change in my next build when I played the game again. And that's something that was really surprising to me. Again, I have never played a game where I thought like, oh, okay, when I play again, I'm going to put more skills into this and I'm going to make sure that I build more of that. It was cool. And it was something that I had never encountered before. And I remember speaking to people about it and being excited about the next playthrough before I had even finished the first playthrough. My first playthrough, I did about 150 hours. I'm 84% complete as far as achievements go. And I ended up getting the sun ending, which for my V and my romance character and everything else was very in line with what I wanted. I know that some people really felt like the star ending was better, but I think that that really changes depending on who you're romancing and how your story went. As much as there are characters that I don't love, they are so well done. Carrie is somebody that really bothers me. I think he's so wrapped up in his own world, and there's so much he says and does that just bothers me and pisses me off and makes me roll my eyes at him. But it's engaging even with all of that. I feel like he is a real person when I'm playing because you run into people that annoy you and that, you constantly are rolling your eyes at. So that was great. I like the fact that you do get a lot of freedom to play the game you want to play. You don't necessarily have to play it my way. You don't have to play it one way. I've been reading more and more recently, people kind of losing their minds over Tears of the Kingdom and some of the different ways to do the same puzzle and what is the correct way to do the same puzzle. A game I used to play again as a kid, The Incredible Machine, was sort of this, they'd give you little things, mice in cages and wheels and balls and little motor things, and you would basically have to get something to do something. And there was never a right way to do it. As long as the end result was what they had asked you for, it didn't matter. You could do things so many different ways and try things so many different ways. So I guess I was spoiled with the idea that all games are like that there isn't necessarily a right way to do it. It's just how you do it. But watching, comments and things and people trying to figure out, okay, well, what did the developers mean for us to do? How did they mean for us to solve this puzzle? That's really interesting to me because, again, I just kind of assumed that it was like, well, as long as you get it done, we don't really care how you do it. And there's aspects of that in Cyberpunk. There's times where I accidentally finish missions just because I stumbled onto something or I discovered something or I happened to be sneaking around doing something else and I found this other thing. And that's fun. That's, that when you're not even really focusing on one mission and you manage to scoop it up while you're doing another, that's a lot of fun. And it gives you kind of that feeling of like, I'm doing well. I've succeeded with something. I also think that the relationships with the various characters, and I'm not even necessarily speaking of romances, but like the growth of the relationships and the humor of the relationships are great. There's something that feels very organic and real about it. You're not best friends with everybody the second you start. I think losing Jackie early is really hard. It's hard on the story and it's hard when you've come to really enjoy a character and have to lose them so early on. I wish there was a bit more time between when I started the game and the heist mission. That's definitely something that I would play differently. I would take a lot more time to play missions with Jackie and run around with him and do some more stuff. So I really felt like we just met this cool character and he was gone. And it's interesting to me too, the idea of, a purely platonic friendship that is that close. That is like almost brotherly or sisterly, depending on again how you play your V. The customization of the characters is super fun. I think that considering how little you see of them, an argument can be made that it's not that important. But I'm somebody who kind of always has my imagination running. I always kind of have that internal commentary going. So even when I wasn't seeing my V, in my mind, I was seeing her as I built her. So I guess you can argue either way for that. Keanu Reeves is awesome. He's a Canadian, and I just like the way he presents himself to the world. I couldn't care less that he was in this game. I don't know that I've ever heard of an actor being in a game and that being the impetus for me to try it. I've never sort of been like, oh, okay, that person's in this game, so I want to play that game. It's just not something that I care about at the end of the day. I think it's much more about story and type of game and playtime and all sorts of other things. I think as long as the voice actors are good, I'm not really overly concerned if I know them or not. So Idris Elba being in Phantom Liberty, well, it's like, yeah, he's awesome. He's an amazing actor. I'm not going to play Phantom Liberty for that reason. He could be someone that I've never heard of before, and I still would be wanting to play Phantom Liberty. I'm really curious to hear what people are planning on doing with the DLC. If you're planning on playing it fresh, if you're planning on just playing off of a save you already have, I want to know the pros and cons of both because I'm debating with myself about it and I haven't really decided. I do want to try the new trees and I do want to try some of the changes, but maybe that's a second playthrough. Maybe just going forward with the save I already have is sufficient to the cause. There's also a part of me that's curious about the other endings. Should I go back and play the other endings and see how they go and yada yada? I don't know. I haven't decided. I was so happy with how my story ended. My story of V ended. I would have loved to have been given the option to do the Secret Sun ending. I found out about that after I finished it, and the idea of having Rogue sticking around is nice. It's a nice sort of round way to finish things off. But I also felt like her dying made a bit of sense with the storyline I was running because of her kind of atoning for what she had done between, her time with Johnny and then her meeting V. I think she felt like she had something to atone for, and that was a lot of fun. I like the fact that male and female characters are good or bad, are powerful or not powerful, are ridiculous or not ridiculous. There doesn't seem to be a gender split that way, which for some games very much have. And that's cool too. I hear people argue all the time that a character shouldn't be changeable from one gender to another because they want a canon character. But then a game comes out where it's female led and there's a group of gamers who still kind of lose their shit. And, why do I have to play a whole game with a girl being my character? And I can understand because so many female gamers have been spending our whole lives mostly playing male characters. And it's a little silly to me that there's not enough empathy in people to recognize that aspect of it. I'm a Star Wars nerd. I have always been a Star Wars nerd. Being a short brunette growing up, Princess Leia was the only princess I really identified with. And she was a badass, and I loved that about her. And so when people question why a female character should be leading a Star Wars film or game, It's disheartening to me because I don't understand why my love for that whole franchise, the books, the movies, the comics, everything in and around it, why my feelings are not important and discounted, and why feelings of another gender are more important and more accepted. It's just kind of silly. But I digress. Playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla and then playing Cyberpunk shortly thereafter, it was really nice to be able to kind of pick and customize my character and my character's gender. And I don't think it really ruined the story in any way. There was never a moment where somebody said something that I was like, oh, that doesn't really make sense for a girl, or oh, that would make more sense if it was a guy. I think that that was extremely well done in both games. But with Cyberpunk, it really felt like there was someone there the whole time saying like, oh, we gotta consider how that's gonna come out because it's this gender, and would someone say that to this gender versus that gender? It felt very smooth. It felt very cunning in a way that I appreciated. I do wonder some of the NPCs if they use the same sort of derogatory terms, whether I'm playing a male V or a female V. That's sort of one thing that popped into my mind a couple times. I was like, wow, would they be using that word if I was a dude? But beyond that, I really didn't have any qualms about what was happening. I think there's a lot of heart and a lot of love in CD Projekt Red in general. I think what they're trying to do is great. I am hopeful that the DLC release goes well. Again, I wasn't so entrenched in the release of Cyberpunk, so I can't really speak to how that went. But I don't believe that players and reviewers were given hours of playtime prior to its release the way that they were with Phantom Liberty. So I'm hopeful that that there alone shows a bit more preparedness. And I think that the question of whether coming out with this finished DLC and upgraded system for the base game, whether or not that is enough for forgiveness for those group of people who are still really frustrated with how it all went down. I'm hopeful, but I always am. I want things to go well. I hope things go well. But there is a part of me too that's like, this might be the time you get burned. This might be the first time you really encounter something not being ready and something being unplayable or losing a save because of bugs. So there is a cautious part of me hanging out in the back of my mind for all of this as well. So yeah, I want to know what you're hoping for, what you would like to see with the DLC and with the changes to the base game. I want to know what you think about the sequel. I want to know how you think they're going to make it so that V can have a sequel in the first place, especially if she didn't have the best ending in your game, or he, for that matter. And most of all, I'm curious if you're going to do another playthrough after all the changes, or if you're just going to go off one of your save games, or if you're going to try both, and which one are you going to do first? Let me know. I'm curious what you think. This is Kadona Rose, Just the Facts Ma'am, Cyberpunk Edition. If you're into it, please consider liking and subscribing. I would really appreciate it. And I will see you next time.